Hey everybody, Eric here. Just wanted to plug a few things that we're doing in October. So coming up on October 14th at the Palace Theater in Gallatin, Tennessee, we have Southern Gothic, the podcast, featuring the Unseen Paranormal podcast. Me and my buddy Brandon Scheck decided to bring our shows live to the stage. So I will have special guest Alan Searcy, who y'all are familiar with from the show, from Southern Ghost Story series of books. He just put out Ghost of Gallatin #2. So we'll be talking about the history and hauntings of Gallatin, Tennessee, and the Haunted Palace Theater itself, where we're having the show at. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be there with merchandise and be there to do meet and greet and talk to everybody and just have a good evening. Tickets are on sale now at southerngothicmedia.com or unseenparanormalpodcast.com. Go grab your tickets now while they're available. They are going quick. And then also got an awesome Paracon coming up October 22nd at the Wilson County Fairgrounds in Lebanon, Tennessee, called Phantom Pause, an Historic Cause. I will be there as a speaker and as the MC all day. We also have some other great speakers, paranormal researcher, investigator from Elk Valley Paranormal, Sin Schrader Hill. She's also a paranormal author. She will be there speaking and have a booth. We got Mr. Alan Searcy from Southern Ghost Stories, who I was just talking about. He will be there giving a presentation, talking about his books and doing some signings and selling some books. And we have Mr. Pat Fitzhugh, who has spent 40 years researching the Bell Witch legend and lore, and he'll be there doing a presentation up on stage talking, and he'll be there signing books as well, so you can come meet him and talk to him. We've got other great speakers as well. A lot of our vendors are going to get up and talk. A lot of local paranormal teams from Middle Tennessee are going to be there with booths, and we're just going to have a good day. The tickets are $10 at the door. That's October 22nd at the Wilson County Fairgrounds in Lebanon, Tennessee, and like I said, tickets are $10 at the door. So hope to see you at one of these upcoming events. We're going to have a lot of fun and enjoy Spooky Month. And now on to this week's episode. Join us as we dive into the history, hauntings, and high strangeness of the world to try to better understand the paranormal. I will be your guide. I am paranormal researcher and investigator Eric Freeman-Sims. Welcome to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Unseen Paranormal. Today we are chatting with the training manager for Ghost Tours of St. Augustine, Cathy Hatton. Ghost Tours of St. Augustine is the original ghost tour organization that first began researching and cataloging the city of St. Augustine's haunted history over 30 years ago. Today we're going to talk to Cathy about the history and hauntings of this amazing old city. Hey Cathy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Eric. Nice to be here.
So I just want to start off, for full disclosure, y'all were nice enough to comp me a free investigation when I came down on vacation a few months ago. So I just want people to know that and get that out.
We gave you a freebie.
Yeah. And we got to go around and investigate outside of the Castillo de San Marcos, which is the big giant coquina fort that's there in St. Augustine. And then also one of the cemeteries. And we had a blast. It was great. Really, really enjoyed it. Really appreciate that I got to bring my friends and family to experience kind of some of the stuff that I do on a normal basis. And it was more for them to experience it. But yeah, I really appreciate y'all doing that.
Okay, you're very welcome.
How did you get into history and the paranormal and doing the ghost tours with the Ghost Tours of St. Augustine?
Well, I have to tell you, Eric, I'm not from St. Augustine. I'm actually from Ohio. But I fell in love with the town when I first started visiting there and decided I wanted to live there. So after 25 years, 4 kids and 2 husbands, I finally got my dream and was able to move to St. Augustine. And at that point, I'm just a total history geek, so I became very interested in that. And a friend recommended that I start working as a tour guide. So I began doing educational tours for 4th graders coming into St. Augustine. And from there, it's just over the years has evolved into more and more in training tour guides and that sort of thing, as well as just more research all the time. I love the stories. I love the legends and those types of things. I can't say that I'm a paranormal investigator. I don't think I'm that empathic, but certainly I love hearing other people's experiences and seeing the photographs they take and those kind of things. And I love doing ghost tours. So it's just a fun thing to do.
Yeah, and I love the history with the paranormal. And like I say here on the show all the time, you have to kind of understand the history to understand why a place would be haunted to begin with. And then also knowing that history, it helps you connect with the spirits that are there at that location.
That's true. Otherwise, you have no idea who's reaching out to you.
Yeah, so I have a fondness for St. Augustine. Me and my parents vacationed in St. Augustine when I was a kid growing up. 2 weeks every year, we went to St. Augustine, and it was amazing. And I finally got to, after talking about it and talking about the ghost of St. Augustine to my friends and my family, I finally got them all to come for vacation down there, like I was saying, and we got to experience some cool stuff. But I've always had a fondness and a fascination with the city. And it has a European history dating back 450 years, and then plus thousands of years in Native American history. And you always hear about, Charleston and Savannah and places like that being kind of the most haunted cities and having all these ghosts. But St. Augustine is older than those two cities and has such a bigger history.
We're a smaller town because St. Augustine, unlike Charleston and Savannah, doesn't have that deep water harbor. So we never grew, but we certainly have a lot of years on everybody else. Yeah, we were founded in 1565. So, and things began happening almost immediately. You know that we were founded based on a massacre. So the ghost started from the very beginning.
Yeah, and then you have the big Castillo de San Marcos fort, the Coquina Fort. And for people who don't know, Coquina is just a concretions of like shells layered over the years, and there's lots of things around there and in Florida in general built out of coquina. But you have this massive Spanish fort, and the Spanish kind of settled that area. And like you're talking about, the massacre of Native Americans and lots of that type of history.
Well, and St. Augustine was founded because the Spanish had claimed Florida for the King of Spain and the Catholic Church. And when the French moved in the 1560s, that just didn't sit well with the Spanish king, so he sent Pedro Menendez to rid the area of the French. And in the process of doing that, Menendez massacred over 200 Frenchmen just south of St. Augustine. So our once beautiful Bay of the Dolphins was renamed the Bay of the Massacre, and the Matanzas Bay and the Matanzas Inlet was named for that massacre of the French. As they went along, at first the natives were very happy to have the Spanish there. In fact, they brought them into their homes and allowed them to start their colony there on the native dwellings, in the native dwellings there. However, when food became scarce, the Spanish showed their true European colors, and it began to cause problems for the natives. And that's when there were several problems with massacres and everything based on that type of thing. So yes, we have a few of those going on, and a few disparate burial sites around town that don't necessarily have headstones on top of them.
Yeah, one of the interesting cemeteries, and I found this weird because I've never seen this anywhere else, but kind of across the street from the Castillo de San Marcos is the cemetery. They don't bury people in it anymore, and they only open it up like once a month for people to tour it. Or I found that kind of odd.
And sadly, Eric, that has to do with vandalism. As recently as Hurricane Irma, the fences to that cemetery were destroyed, and so it was open and people were able to go in, and they went in and tried prying up some of the false crypts in the cemetery and destroying it. So unfortunately, we cannot have people just walking around through there, because in addition to those soft stones, a lot of the stones are made out of coquina and softer materials. Also, there are just people who don't respect what we have and don't respect that history. And so, yeah, only once a month on the third Saturday from 11 to 2, you can tour the cemeteries.
Yeah, that's sad that people want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, in the paranormal, we're pretty respectful of, locations, and especially cemeteries and things like that. But, it only takes one person to ruin it for everybody else.
Absolutely. And as you know from your paranormal tour that you took, you can still connect with these entities around those cemeteries without actually going in and standing directly next to their graves. I know that in the Huguenot cemetery that you're referring to, there are several different entities that usually come out during those paranormal investigations.
Yeah, and there were a few in particular that I remember our guy talking about that kind of like the ladies and kind of mess with the ladies.
Yeah. That's the three soldiers. That's John Hall, John Lyman, and Erastus Nye. And they all died in 1835. In January of 1835, were buried one next to the other. We really don't know how they died or if they knew each other, but somehow they seem to have found each other in the afterlife. And psychics have come in, have been able to connect with these three gentlemen, and they have admitted that they just like to see the women jump. So a woman sometimes can stand next to the fence at the Huguenot Cemetery, and as long as there's not a man around to protect her, they have been known to get a little pat or a little pinch in a place where you're not supposed to be patted or pinched. We've also had a few instances of tour guides, some of our tour guides that were more popular with the three soldiers, having their ties pulled on their bodices of their costumes, or one girl very memorably had hers tied onto the fence pole. So when she went to walk away, she was literally tied into the fence. So,
wow.
Those three soldiers can be they're mischievous. They don't hurt anything, but they're mischievous.
Yeah. And there was another story about a gentleman who was buried there but then dug up and moved.
Yes, that's Judge Stickney, and that's one of those classic ghost stories or legends that you will hear in St. Augustine. Judge Stickney is one of our spirits that's been around for a long time. Died in the 1880s and was buried there at the Huguenot Cemetery, but he was actually from up north. And when his daughters came to adulthood, they decided that they wanted their father buried in the National Cemetery closer to them. And so they had his body exhumed to be brought up north. However, before the body made it up north, the casket was ransacked by some vagrants that happened to be in the cemetery while they were digging the coffin up. And according to the legend, Judge Stickney's gold teeth were stolen from his body. So they say that Judge Stickney still walks that Huguenot cemetery, looking intently at the ground. Not sure if he's looking for his missing teeth or if he's looking for the guys that took them. But Judge Stickney is definitely one of our more well-known and popular ghosts. And I did talk to someone recently who was very happy to hear that story, because she said that she had seen a man walking in the cemetery and had asked her mother about it, said, "Do you see that man?" And she said, "No." And she was very pleased to find out that, yes, there is a male haunting in the cemetery, and we believe that to be Judge Stickney. At least that's where the legend goes.
Yeah, and I've mentioned Castillo de San Marcos a few times. It's an amazing place. As a kid, when I went there, I was just in awe about how it's built, because it's built kind of like a medieval castle-looking thing, and it's kind of unique as far as a lot of architecture in the United States.
But that architectural design, that was Ignacio Daza, who designed those forts, and it is very similar to the one in Puerto Rico. There's one in Brazil. That design with the 4 points and the ravelin, which kind of looks like a turtle when you look at it from the sky, is, that was considered very good design for forts at that time. They call the Castillo, they call it a castle, but it is a fort. It's definitely not a castle, except for the moat, right?
Right. Yeah.
The dry moat.
Yeah, and the reason I understand why it was a dry moat was because if they put water in it, it would kind of eat at the coquina.
Well, and that's what's happened since. But in the beginning, the reasoning for having a dry moat was, as well as having a 20-foot drop before anyone could get to the walls of the fort, it gave them a place where when they were under siege, they could take their animals, their livestock, and put their livestock in there. And that way, if anyone tried to attack them, they at least had their food supplies right there with them. St. Augustine had been attacked. It had been sacked and burned over 9 times, where they had to completely rebuild before the fort was built. And in the course of those attacks, for example, Robert Searles, very famous pirate, came in, and when he was unable to find any gold or treasure at the fort, which was a wooden fort at the time, he decided to just ransack the entire town. And in the course of doing that, he also burned their food supplies and killed all their livestock. So they were left to rebuild with nothing. When the fort was designed as a direct, Queen of Spain finally came off the money to build the fort as a direct response to Robert Searles' raid. And at that point, it was designed so that they wouldn't have that problem where they would lose food and that kind of thing. So the moat actually served a purpose. But later, when it was had to do with, Forrestal said, if there's a moat there around a castle, you have to put water in it and alligators, and oh boy, what fun. And 50 years of that almost destroyed it, because it did. It deteriorated the foundations of the fort, because coquina is quarried out of water, because in water it softens and you can use hand tools to cut it out. So just as a matter of people not knowing their history, when they thought, hey, let's just do this because it looks fun, and it almost destroyed it.
And then on the outside, if you walk around the fort, there is a wall that has all kind of bullet holes in it.
It's a mystery, isn't it, Eric?
Yeah.
Did you get any reactions with your equipment when you were over there with the paranormal investigation?
We had a few things come across on the spirit box that sounded nothing really clear,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't a radio station. It sounded like a conversation that we weren't privy to, which happens a lot in the paranormal.
Yeah. Well, that particular wall, we like to call that the execution wall. It does look like bullet holes all across that. However, if it was an execution wall, they were some of the world's worst shots, because if you notice, there are bullet holes at ankle level on that wall, as well as higher up. So some people have said they had a practice range there, or the National Park Service has even put out the theory that there were vines growing up the wall, and when they pulled the vines out, because of the soft nature of the coquina, it pulled out chunks of the coquina also. So lots of different stories about that execution wall. Boy, it makes for a great picture, doesn't it?
Yeah, and a great story.
Yeah.
What are some of the claims of hauntings in the Castillo de San Marcos?
At the Castillo, there are some that are wildly romantic and completely made up. And then there are some that seem to have a lot of truth to them. There is sometimes a figure of a soldier seen going across the top at night, or you'll see a light moving along the top of the Castillo. And one of the interesting things about this particular national monument is there is no artificial lighting on the inside of that building. So if you're seeing lights on the top of that fort at night, you're not seeing anything of this world. And that has happened, where people see what looks like someone with a lantern moving along the top of the fort. There are stories in the siege of 1702. The people of the town, over 2,000 people, were in that fort for 51 days, while James Moore held the city under siege. And during that time, the fort was set up so they had plenty of food, and they had their livestock there and everything. But you don't have 2,000 people in that size environment, especially, with no running water and that sort of thing, without there being some disease or whatever. And so people did die. And more than one person has seen the figure of a woman wearing a winter cape, because this happened in December to January, walking the grounds of the fort. And people have said that she is dressed in the Spanish style that would have been typical for that time, for 1702. I have seen pictures of a shadowy entity that looks like this woman. So I believe she's there. I believe that there would be soldiers there, because as the fort was attacked, if you fell on the fort grounds, they didn't have any way to get you back home or anything like that. A body on those grounds, they would have to dig a trench and bury the body right where it lay. So it only makes sense that there are some spirits that were not happy with being left behind there at the Castillo after an attack. Most famously, archaeologists found some remains of young men, and from buttons and different things that were with these remains. They believe they were British men who were they believe were that first line that was sent in to attack the fort. So here's these young boys who've been conscripted into the British military, and they're told, okay, you're going to go over there, carry a gun, and walk right up to this fort where they're firing down on you from above. These boys didn't go home. And their burial site is to the north side of the fort, going out towards where the National Park Service building is in Ripley. So they do believe that that's where the remains of those men are. Some of them have been found by city archaeologists. It's not a marked site, but it's definitely a site where people get a lot of reaction and that sort of thing. So we do, know that those burials are there. There are burials on the backside of the fort, unmarked burials, where after an epidemic, they did not want to bring bodies into the town, so they buried them behind the fort. So throughout St. Augustine, there are a number of places where you never know who you're walking on.
Yeah. And there's another story about when they dug out part of the fort about a woman and a man that were shackled together, if I remember correctly.
That is a very, very popular myth. There's the story, what is that at some point the captain of the fort's wife fell in love with one of the soldiers, and the captain in his fury chained them both to the wall and then had the room blocked up and walked away from it, and they were left there. And it's wonderful and it's romantic, but wouldn't the soldiers who had to block the wall up have remembered that and told somebody? Wouldn't there be some other record of that? What we do know is that in the 1800s, when they were moving a cannon along the top of the fort, the cannon fell through the ceiling and into a room that they didn't realize was there. And in that room, there were bones. The bones were not attached to the walls, but there were, by chains, but there were bones in that room. On the original plan for the fort, that was the gunpowder room. It was supposed to be an ammunition room. However, it was too damp. They couldn't safely store gunpowder. So they used it just to throw garbage in for a while, and then they sealed it up because it was a worthless room. So in reality, the bones that were found there were dinner bones rather than human bones. But that story has become one of the most pervasive legends that surrounds the Castillo de San Marcos. And I think, and I'm sorry if I'm bursting anyone's bubble with this, but I think one of the things is, over time, something really does happen, like this unknown room was found, and people want to explain those things, and so these legends are born. And but you have to sometimes look at it with logic and say, wait a minute, there would have been some record of these people disappearing. The Spanish liked to keep records. You couldn't tell 10 soldiers, okay, I want you to brick this wall up with these people suffering inside, and expect that no one would ever mention it again. So it becomes a difficult story. It's a wonderful legend, but it's not a story that can be proven.
Yeah.
And historically, it doesn't really make sense. So that's one of the things that I guess, and this, every story, every legend, they all start from some reality, from some truth. But there are things that I've seen in St. Augustine that, it's really difficult to explain it logically.
Yeah. It's funny how some of the same kind of tropes go across different legends and stuff that pop up all around the world. And one of them is kind of that star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet thing. They can't be together, and so they die together type thing.
Absolutely. It is one of the favorite ones that people like to talk about, and it will show up everywhere. And one of the things, St. Augustine has such an amazing history and so many things that happened there. And so I just feel like we really don't need to make a lot up because
Right.
there are a lot of things there that are there just there. In the oldest wooden schoolhouse is on St. George Street, right?
Yeah.
Behind the oldest wooden schoolhouse today is a big parking lot. But at one time, that location was the British Guardhouse during the British period, during the American Revolution. We were a British colony. So that was a British Guardhouse in that location. And probably a parade ground directly behind it, where the parking lot on Spanish Street is. There were trees, around this parking lot. And some of these trees harbor definite spiritual or haunted feelings and that sort of thing. In that parking lot, we have encountered an entity who they say his name is Philip, and also a Native American entity who I was just told by a friend of mine there is a very, very angry Indian here. And she said, I really need to get away from him. He is very angry. So just walking through a typical parking lot is not typical. And I did at one point, one of our guides had a woman take a picture in that parking lot. There was nothing there but cars. But when they looked at the picture on the computer, there was a group of about 10 people wearing capes and flat hats and definitely 17th century clothing.
Wow.
Standing under a tree in that parking lot. And it's one of those pictures that I just look at and I'm like, I can't explain this. It just makes no sense.
Yeah.
Because you would notice a group of reenactors while you're doing your tour. So, just amazing things like that we have happen.
And one of the kind of bigger figures in St. Augustine's history is Henry Flagler.
Mm-hmm.
The Flagler College, those buildings and the churches that he built are amazing.
It is beautiful architecture, isn't it?
Yes. The story, the college was actually built as a hotel for like the elite, and some of the crazy things that they have in there that he put in this hotel is just amazing.
Henry Flagler, and people outside of Florida usually don't realize that Henry Flagler was one of the founders of Standard Oil Company. He was John D. Rockefeller's partner. However, he was of the belief that you don't publicize your name. You don't have to put your name on everything. So anything you see with the Flagler name on it was posthumous. But he was one of the wealthiest men in the United States in the 1880s. And so he built that hotel in St. Augustine because he wanted to create a new tourist destination, the Newport of the South. And this was his first hotel that he built, the Hotel Ponce de Leon, what's now Flagler College. He had his architects employ a lot of Spanish influence into the hotel and also a lot of influence of the sea. So you'll see things like doorknobs shaped like seashells. And you'll see the chain fencing around the hotel is actually the type of harbor chain that they would use in Spain to keep ships out of their harbor. It has mace on the chains. All these different little things that were incorporated into the design of the Ponce de Leon, along with Tiffany glass windows and beautiful tile work and, amazing triptych and that sort of thing that are all in that hotel. It's now a dorm for the Flagler College students. Freshman students live in the old hotel.
Yeah, it's amazing. And he built two churches, one for a daughter of his that got killed.
Well, Henry Flagler believed that because his patrons for his hotel were expected to come and to pay for January through Easter. So you had a 3-month period that you were there. And you cannot spend 3 months in a place without having some place to worship that was worthy of very wealthy people. This was the New York Social Register. So he endowed the churches around St. Augustine so that in part, so that his guests would have places to go to church. He wanted to build the Hotel Ponce de Leon on the site of the old Methodist church. And so in exchange for that, he had them build a Methodist church a few blocks over. His architect's Carrera and Hastings built it for the Methodist. That's Grace Methodist Church, and it is a lovely church. But you're right, it does not even compare to the Memorial Presbyterian. And the Memorial Presbyterian, it was modeled after St. Mark's Cathedral in Europe and was built as a memorial to Henry Flagler's daughter, Jenny Louise. And Jenny Louise, Henry Flagler had 3 children, Carrie, Jenny, and Henry Jr. His daughter, Carrie, died at age 3.5. Jenny was in her early 30s, and she had gotten married and finally had a child. Unfortunately, the child died within hours of birth, and Jenny was very, very sick. So they put her on a yacht to come from Charleston down to St. Augustine so that she could recover in St. Augustine's warm and healthy air with her father. And Jenny Louise unfortunately died while en route. So Henry Flagler wanted a memorial for her, and he wanted it built so that on the anniversary of her death, the 1-year anniversary, they could have a service. When you see the Memorial Presbyterian with this huge gold dome overhead and this just magnificent church, the entire thing was built from concept to completion in less than 1 year, in 1888 to 89. So no power tools, all handwork. The only thing that was not in were the Italian stained glass windows because they had not arrived as yet. But they were able to have Jenny Louise's service on the anniversary of her death. The church was completed 10 days before that anniversary. So, and Henry Flagler, his first wife, Mary Harkness, Jenny Louise Flagler Benedict, and her daughter are all entombed within the Memorial Presbyterian Mausoleum.
And he didn't allow church bells in the churches that he built either.
Well, he did not want it. He endowed the Baptist church with $10,000 to build their own church. They built theirs out of yellow brick, which was very unique. But the provision was no, they would not have bells in the tower, because Henry Flagler's Memorial Presbyterian, just a block away, had a magnificent organ and a magnificent bell system within it, and he did not want any other bell to be competing with his on Sunday morning. So he made that provision in his endowment of the churches. Now, of course, the Catholic church downtown on the plaza, it has bells.
Yeah, his influence. I mean, the college is massive, which what was the hotel, and it's like it takes up a good chunk of downtown St. Augustine.
Yeah, well, they own a good chunk of downtown St. Augustine now too. But yeah, that building is just it is magnificent. It's worth taking a tour when you go to St. Augustine if you can. They offer a few tours run by students. It is well worth it to do that because you don't see this architecture just anywhere. And, and then you go into the Memorial Presbyterian, which is still a very active church. And you go over to the Alcazar Hotel, which is now our St. Augustine City Hall, but also the Leitner Museum. And that was Henry Flagler's hotel for the common folk, for you and me, those of us who only wanted to stay one night and we could afford $2.50 a night.
How nice of him.
Well, somebody had to help support that big hotel when they, since they were only open 3 months. But the Alcazar Hotel too had all the recreation facilities, has the swimming pool, the bowling alley, saunas and steam rooms, card rooms, that sort of thing. So if you were staying over at the Ponce de Leon, you would go over to the Alcazar. They even had a bicycle academy because at that time, very few people could ride a bicycle, and you had to have a license to ride a bicycle. Now, if you could afford an automobile, that didn't require a license, but a bicycle did at the turn of the 20th century. So you had to take your lessons at the bicycle academy. But the Alcazar has since became the Leitner Museum. After the hotel went under, that particular hotel was purchased by a man named Otto Leitner. And he created the Leitner Museum, a museum of Victorian-era antiquities that he had collected. as the founder of Hobbies magazine, his hobby was buying out other people's collections. So they have everything from Winston Churchill's stuffed lion and an Egyptian sarcophagus to fine artwork and furnishings in the Lightner Museum. And they're showcased in those old hotel ballrooms and steam rooms and that type of thing. So it's an interesting experience. Otto Leitner himself is buried in the courtyard of the Leitner Museum. So he's still there with his collection.
It kind of became part of his collection in death.
A little bit, yeah. And there are stories of people seeing Otto Leitner there too.
With Flagler, is there any stories of people seeing him or like guests of the hotel and the college being haunted? Or
Eric, one of my absolute favorite experiences was as a tour guide. I was standing in front of the Ponce de Leon in front of Flagler College, telling them the story of Henry Flagler and his second wife, Ida Alice Shorts, who Ida Alice went insane. And unfortunately, she attempted to murder her husband. In the course of doing such, she was institutionalized for the rest of her life. She was a spiritualist, and she believed that the spirits spoke to her through her Ouija board and were telling her she needed to be with the Tsar of Russia. So she decided the only thing standing in her way was Henry Flagler. And so she attempted to rid the world of Henry Flagler. It's quite a story, and it's all real. So we do believe, though, that after her death, maybe Ida Alice came back there to the Hotel Ponce de Leon. There certainly are a lot of stories of a woman being seen there in the hotel. For a long time, that those hotel rooms were just dorm rooms for freshman girls. Now they're co-ed. And the girls would have strange experiences. Some of them said that they'd be washing their face and look up in the mirror and there's another face behind them in the mirror. Or during the night, you might wake up during the night and think, something's not right. I don't want to open my eyes. This doesn't feel good. But you have to open your eyes,
Yeah.
And these girls, they'd open their eyes and there's this woman looking over the bed as if to say, is this the one? Is this the one Henry's been seeing? Ida Alice was jealous too. Henry was not really a womanizer, but Ida Alice certainly wasn't going to allow him to get anywhere. But yeah, so there are a lot of those hauntings, and the girls, the students that live in that dorm either definitely believe that there's something there, or they think it's all just silliness, but I've never seen anything. And I think that's pretty true of any place that there's activity that goes on, Some people have experience it and others don't. But one night I was standing out in front and I'm telling this story and talking about Henry Flagler and how he's still seen around the hotel, and the security guard was taking this flag down. He stopped what he was doing and he walked over to my group and said, I saw him last night. And he described to us how, as he was making his rounds, he saw this man dressed in a suit walking down the hallway in front of him. And at the end of the hallway, he turned the corner and disappeared. So it's, depending on what you think of the sanity of our security guards.
Right.
Henry Flagler is still walking around.
Yeah.
He has a lot of other hotels and in fact, a mansion down in Palm Beach. Or in West Palm. So I doubt that he spends a lot of time in St. Augustine, but yes, people have definitely said that they've seen a man there as well. It's just the Flagler College is, as you said, is just an amazing place. And when you take that and the Alcazar across the street and the Casa Monica over on the other side, those three 1880s hotels are just a whole different world from the Spanish colonial St. Augustine that we were talking about over at the fort.
Yeah.
There's always something else.
Yeah, and there's so much more. We just barely scratched the surface today talking. I mean,
oh yeah.
You have the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, which was the original, the one in St. Augustine is the original museum, and it was actually Castle Warden. And then you have the old jail, and there's just so much. We could talk for the next 3 hours about the history and the hauntings. of St. Augustine. But I would tell everybody to go on vacation to St. Augustine. It is amazing. And if they're going to go on vacation, they need to come see y'all at Tours of St. Augustine. Y'all do the St. Augustine City Walks, the Ghost Tours of St. Augustine Black Heritage Tours. So y'all have various tours that y'all do.
Yeah, we are not currently doing the Black Heritage Tours because the woman who originated those has retired. But we do a number of different tours. We will be doing specialty tours for the Nights of Light and the holiday seasons. Ghost Tours of St. Augustine is the original ghostly experience. We are the first ghost tour in the state of Florida, one of the first in the country. So we're very proud of that, and we're proud of the fact that that original research and hiring those paranormal investigators and bringing them in was done by Tour St. Augustine and Ghost Tours of St. Augustine.
Yeah, I absolutely had a blast, and I'll tell everybody go do the ghost tour, go do the city walks where you just hear the history and see the buildings. Just take it all in because it's all amazing. It's an amazing city. It just has it's just a calmness and I'm just infatuated with that city. If I ever moved outside of Nashville where I live and born and raised, St. Augustine would be where I go.
It is a great town. It is a great town. Come and visit us. It's getting crowded, so just come and visit us.
Yeah, I was told we stayed on Anastasia Island and talking to some of the people over there, some of the locals, and they were like, yeah, we don't go across the bridge.
That's so sad. I walk downtown twice a week just because it's so beautiful.
I will put the links to y'all, as I normally do, in the show notes, so y'all can go check it out and go take a tour of Ghost Tours of St. Augustine and go see Cathy. You may get her, you may get one of the other great tour guides that they have. But thank you so much, Cathy, for coming on and talking about the history and hauntings. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. I really always enjoy the chance to talk about our town. Thank you.
All right, everybody, stay safe out there. We'll see you next time. Have a good day. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening.
You have come to the end of the line. Whoa. I can feel you as you pass the other side.